Hello, everybody. So we welcome you to our Startup Leaders Club today for the online panel discussion by inspirational leaders of innovation and drivers of change. And our today's discussion from the series of Global Tech Trends 2020 as a fast track to the new reality. It's actually a brainstorming session devoted to exchange of experiences of serial entrepreneurs and VC investors on disrupting industries, creating new business models, and finding new opportunities in crisis. And I'd like to start with a brief introduction about today's panelists. Bertken, could you also join us and introduce yourself and your company?
Hello, greetings from Estonia, Tallinn. Thank you for having me. I'm an entrepreneur in fintech area. We are developing the most transparent and easy to use platform where people can buy easily tokenized gold. And it has been a great journey in this field, and I'm really happy to cooperate with La Token and meet all new people and who are like-minded and happy to share their ideas and visions.
Thank you, Bertken. And Jim, our current speaker, could you also introduce yourself again?
Sure. I think this is my 5th time participating, so it's always interesting. Always meet interesting people. A good conversation, I think. So I'm a computational neurobiologist, which means I build models of brains and computers, and I've been doing that for a long time. But the reason I'm here is because I have, for the last 35 years, been working on how you use computers, computer networks, et cetera, to actually educate children. And for the last 21 years, I've been running a company called Nomedian, which launched a site called Yville, which was one of the first virtual worlds for children, one of the first game-based virtual worlds, et cetera, in 1999. Now has about 8.6 million registered users. And with the current circumstances around the world, although Yville was launched as an informal site for exploring how to use the internet to educate, with schools increasingly online, we are now moving very strongly in the direction of supporting teachers and schools and classrooms with the technology we've been building for 21 years.
Thank you so much, Jim. And Lilian, could you also briefly let us know about your business and opportunities?
Yes, with this Lilian Wheels, I'm with a Pop Agency. Pop Agency is a brand setting agency. We coach startups managing the interplay of storytelling and story making to grow business and land funding. We also, I'm also the advisor of Loyal VC. It's an early stage VC that seeded about 300 startups around the world. So yeah, I think the storytelling and brand messaging is what we are currently working with, helping startups to pivot their messages.
Thank you, Lilian. And the first question for you, Bertken. So you shared that actually your country can boast some of the startup founders globally making huge effect in terms of producing unicorns for the whole global tech industry. Could you share something of that with us?
Sure. Estonia is quite a small country. We have only 1.3 million people, and we have many success stories, well-known startups that come from Estonia. For instance, Skype has been developed from Estonia. Transfer-wise, Bolt that chose to be one of the best startups in Europe. So we have like many companies and mostly like technology-wise companies that come from Estonia. So we are very happy to and honored to be in this position. And actually, also Estonia is quite well known because of the e-governance. We're like the e-country everything can be done very easily through internet and on technology base. So we don't have to do any paperwork. So we can do everything digitally.
Okay, and what inspired your own business opportunity? Why have you decided to launch this particular business?
It was a few years ago. I thought about the whole economy and how the financial world is moving towards, and we saw that there is a great need to come back to the basics, because our company is dealing with gold, and the gold was the first money in the world. So nowadays everybody's using only currencies like a dollar and euro, so which are not backed by anything, and we see that there is more and more inflation coming. So I see that there is a huge need to come back to the basics, and actually our company's long-term vision is to make gold more as on everyday money transferring system. So we want that people are starting using more gold on everyday basis, which is better for them and their financials.
Thank you, Bertken. Jim, would you like to comment on the recent maybe changing updates, whatever you have in your own story, because you are a serial entrepreneur and you have lots of interactions, forums, events going on in your segment. Would you like to highlight something new for the last week?
Let me see, for the last week, well, one of the things that we're rolling out now, we just received a federal grant from the National Science Foundation. One of the things that we've been, Wyville is an unusual place in which, as I said, we have been experimenting with how you educate children about complex things, and science and technology being one of them. And so it turns out in 2003, we started doing pandemic education by giving all of our users a disease called the YPOX. And we just received a grant from the National Science Foundation to upgrade the YPOX activities in Wyville so that they can be used in schools for children to understand what's going on around them with respect to COVID. It's interesting, in our surveys of the United States, again, there's essentially no curriculum, no education that's been done in the schools at any level about pandemics. But now, obviously, the schools are dealing with pandemics, especially in the United States, which increasingly, I think, along with Brazil and India, are unusual in the extent to which we are being affected by this disease and our apparent inability to respond to it. But anyway, the point is that we're now going to be initiating specifically an effort to educate, children about pandemics so that they can better understand the circumstances that they're in. And that's interesting for another reason as well. I think one of the, and it probably relates a little bit to what Bert's talking about, one of the sort of there are many disconnects between contemporary science and policy and entrepreneurship, for that matter. And one of the big disconnects at the moment has to do with modeling. Increasingly, over the last 30 years, and I've been part of this, scientists have been turning to modeling, numerical simulations to try to understand complex things. We know in our surveys of children and also adults that basically the population knows nothing at all about what models are or how they can be used to understand complex things, for example, like economies. So one of the things that we've taken on ourselves to do is to actually use Wyville as a way for people to start to understand what models are and how they work, so that the population as a whole has a better chance of understanding what is now at the core of a lot of decision making, or I should say, should be at the core of a lot of decision making about complex things. And by the way, I'm very happy to get any gold you want to send me. Just saying.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. And Lillian, you also had a question to Bertken.
I guess I want to ask the question later, but I want to tab into what Jim was joking about. So like the whole, like after a few weeks after pandemic, now we are kind of in a mode a bit of more whimsical, like the first few weeks of pandemic business. Messagings are somber, empathetic, don't want to appear insensitive. And as now this pandemic continues and novelty of the situation kind of wears off. In the messaging area, like what we observe basically, is just there were lots of social media sharing, and like humor has been a wave. Like some industry, of course, still like retail and travel remain somber, but other industry like home goods and fast food are shifting their message to be more humorous. And so we kind of gather a study called this a improvisational marketing intervention, which is pseudo improvisational. Like supposedly marketers should be improvisational, though, because that engage people in the social media that we kind of gathered inside all the consumer engagement sharing, or because they're improvisational and timely sharing on the social media. However, business runs a risk if they empower anyone to become too improvisational, running risk of offending and creating backlash. So one of the way is now, because I think pandemic is going to be going for a few years in this current mode, and humor is one of the way to cope with a pandemic. And so we are tweaking into encouraging humor in our practice, so per se. Yep. And so getting back to the question, but Jim asked question like, how can I get some gold? How do I trade gold in a commerce? The revival of gold, I guess, through the history, people were using gold, and now fiat currency. I guess I mean I lost touch of that part of history, like how gold lost the power and how do you revival it. I mean, I think it makes lots of sense. Like Americans, fiat currency, our deficit. It's like since the Reagan, it's like it's astronomy number. It got a hockey stick of our deficit. So it's totally making sense. But love to learn about that.
Thank you for a question. So I'll try to reply to as easily as possible. So basically, the thing is that the problem for gold nowadays is that it can be used on a daily basis. People can mostly invest in gold, but they can't use it. My personal opinion is that gold is not an investment. Gold is money. And our purpose is to make it possible to use gold as money on a daily basis. It's not easy. There have been few companies who have tried it many years ago, but these companies were shut down because the laws and all this environment wasn't ready for this kind of action. So at the moment, we see that blockchain technology will definitely help to reach this goal, to bring gold back on usage of daily basis, because it will make it much more easier, transparent, and also flexible, because if people can use digital wallets, it's much easier to implement it all and also to use it. And until like blockchain technology was developed and released, there wasn't any good option, for example, for gold to be used more easily. There have been like few options to buy gold in a digital form, but actually you can't do it with it like anything specific. So I personally see a big potential in blockchain technology to help many companies and products and services to expand and implement because of this technology.
Yeah, the history of the gold standard is interesting. Of course, it's been a long debate because, as you said, gold used to be the basis for currency. And actually, it's interesting that as I understand it, gold was separated from U.S. currency during the Great Depression by Roosevelt, because they found that they needed to have more flexibility, which some would say meant that they were inventing currency. But anyway, and then it wasn't actually until 1971 that Richard Nixon declared that not the United States currency would simply be completely independent of the gold standard of gold. So it's a relatively recent, well, for me, recent, 1971 for me is recent, change in the United States. But this issue about whether currency should be backed by gold or not has been around for a while. And I think the argument has been from governments that it's too restricting to link to gold. But it's also interesting that the time when the U.S. broke with the gold standard was during the Great Depression. So as we approach now sort of uncertain economic times, this is a question actually. So as we approach uncertain economic times, some would like to return to a gold standard because it gives a sense of security and certainty. But one could also argue that if the United States was actually linked to a gold standard, they wouldn't be able to spend $5, $6, $7 trillion, which is probably what they're going to have to spend to keep the U.S. economy from imploding. So we're getting into an economics course here, which I don't want to, maybe isn't right for this forum. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, I understand that gold gives a sense of security, right? Because it's a real tangible thing. But on the other hand, the gold standard was given up in the United States, as I understand it, specifically to deal with the complex economic circumstances when the economy in the United States was headed in a very bad direction, which it may be again. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, many thoughts. I agree with you that it's a tough topic, and nobody knows what will happen to the whole economy and financial system in the upcoming years and decades. I personally don't think that we are going back to the gold standard, because it's not good for the governments, because in that case it's not possible to print so much money as they need to cover all the costs and expenses. So I think that we have the fundamental error in the whole system, and I think that people should take care of themselves. We can't like expect or to believe that governments and countries will take care of us. Of course, we hope it will be like so, but if we are looking the trend we are hearing, how the economy and financial system is moving, then to be honest, I'm a bit worried, and I see that people should start thinking more by themselves how they can protect themselves and their families. And I believe that tangible assets are a very good option. And actually, if we're talking about gold and Bitcoin, many people say that Bitcoin is the new gold. And I somehow agree with it, but on the other hand, I disagree with it, because gold, of course, one thing is the supply. If there is a tangible asset, then supply is really important thing, and Bitcoin supply is limited. It's only 21 million Bitcoins. But there are many other things as well that we have to take into consideration if we're talking about like a good form of money. So I personally believe that as gold has been around for centuries, and even more than it has showed us that it's one of the most stable and reliable things that we have today. So then I think that people can decide themselves what's good for them if they are going to use which kind of currency they use, because at the moment we have many different currencies, right? And I think that in upcoming years we will have even more different currencies that people can choose. And I think that we're living in a very interesting times at the moment. And I have also heard different news that different governments are thinking about coming up with their own new digital currencies. So with what they are going to be backed or related, we don't know it yet. There are some news that it will be backed by gold. Some say that it will be backed by cryptocurrency. So there are people who are saying that it is going to be backed by oil. So there are different speculations.
Yeah, there's no question, and there are many places on the internet you can hear people pontificating about what's going on in the world today and how the internet and this technology, digital technology, has changed everything. And there's no doubt. I mean, that's for sure. What isn't known is what the final stable state will be. And actually, again, with respect to what we've been doing since really 1983, we've been asking the question specifically, how does this technology change how people connect to each other, how people learn, how people transfer information, how children are educated? And, I've said before in this particular forum that, the last probable disruption of this kind was with the invention of the printing press. And it took a couple of 100 years for us to really figure out. I mean, it took 230 years after the printing press was invented, for example, for the modern form of the scientific journal to be invented. And it took more than 200 years for the modern form of the novel to be invented. So it took a long time to figure out how to use this new form for communication, which was printed books. And I've also pointed out before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating, but I am a professor, so I do repeat stuff. Anyway, I've said before that, Gutenberg, who invented the printing press, at least in the Western United States or the Western world, he actually decided the way to make money was to print very high quality Latin Bibles and sell to rich people. His company went bankrupt. The guy that really figured out how to use the printing press was Martin Luther, who made cheap tracts printed and distributed them on Catholic churches in Germany, along with a cheap German Bible, and he basically started the Reformation. So, we are in the midst. Everybody knows this. Everyone certainly listening to this knows this, that we are in the midst of a huge transformation. And it's interesting, and we don't know what the end result is. It will take a while. I hope it takes less than 200 years. One interesting thing about our segment, or the segment of sort of ed tech and online learning, is that when I started working on this in the early 80s, I thought that we should hurry up because we wanted to get our ideas out there and we didn't want someone else to take over the field. Well, now, many years later, it turns out I shouldn't have been in such a hurry, because in fact schools and universities for that matter, have lagged behind tremendously. I think some of the innovations that have happened in industry. But the interesting thing with COVID is that they have no choice but to start to use this technology. And I think this has basically accelerated the transformation for educational systems towards really using or understanding how to use this technology, probably by 25 years. So we are in a very, very interesting state at the moment. I'm a professor at university, and I'm watching every day in the university forum, the online forum, professors talking about what the heck they're going to do in the fall. Last term, they sort of were dropped into it, like as were many school teachers in the United States and around the world. All of a sudden, we're not coming back from spring break. You're going to have to do things online, just like that. Okay, and that was chaotic. Well, now they have the summer to prepare for the fall, and it turns out that the conversation is just as chaotic as it was before, because it is very clear, despite the billions of dollars that have invested in online learning, the tools available aren't well matched to the problem. So it's a very interesting situation at the moment for the segment of industry that I'm in, which is how you actually educate people using digital technology. The enormous amount of money that's been spent and invested by investors turns out to have been for not usable. But we have a requirement now to actually do something 2 months from now. And so it's a really interesting situation with tremendous opportunity and considerable risk.
Thank you, Jim. And Lyndon, do you have any particular interesting cases of your clients with regard to the current situation, how they position themselves and their businesses in the global tech, or any of the interesting stories you would like to share with us today? You're muted.
So yeah, there are a few layers to this chime in with James about being slow creativity, and things change, really meaningful change slowly, and so like translate into, we've been talking about entrepreneur never has a trait of being patient, but it's kind of important of being patient in leadership, where a few important element is really patient, make you find humor in the dire situation, and where like the messaging humor, it's not I guess my clients we haven't really conclude the message is really challenging, but I could give you some example. There was a hashtag of called Trader Joe lines. The humor situation was like since the lockdown, the line to shop Trader Joe was really long. It ends up a couple hours, and so there was in New York in this neighborhood a building that's next to Trader Joe. They have been overhearing people because they wait on the line, they got so bored and they start yapping on the phone, not to each other, but they were talking to the family or friends. They keep yapping about stuff, dirty laundry that supposed anyone, no, no one else should hearing, but this building has been eavesdropping, and they couldn't get anything done because they're working from home and overhearing all the yapping, and so they figure a strategy. This neighborhood community, they jot down all the conversation that people were yapping on the phone and make it humorous and put on a sign. So now, like anyone yapping, that their conversation could be read on the sign. So I guess New York Times cover all this. It became itself a channel on Instagram and Twitter hashtag. So people are like now coming, engaging, like check out what has been listed on this Twitter hashtag. It's called Trader Joe UWD, something like that. So that was kind of people that example how that in a situation that you need to be patient and people resorted to humor. I guess at the beginning, these neighborhoods were not humorous. They just want to scream, like come out to like shut up, like stop yapping. Who care about what what you pick, what you put on your ice cream. But now so they were lying, like really has been yeah, I couldn't recall what it is, but there were so many that some of them were amusing.
Yeah, so I haven't in the past in this sessions really linked in very much to what I actually do professionally on science side. But I teach a course in neuroethology, which is looking at behavior from the point of view of brains. And that's different from psychology, by the way. And it turns out humor and laughter are really interesting. When we laugh and when we do things that are humorous, under what circumstances. And of course, it isn't known for certain, but there's one hypothesis about laughter and about humor. The question is, why do we laugh? Why do we tell jokes? And then when we tell jokes, why does everyone in the room laugh? What function does that provide to a social organism? And what does it indicate to the brains in the room? And you might, I don't know if this is interesting or not, but it turns out that one of the hypotheses for what laughter is that it's basically what's known in the animal world as an all clear call. In other words, it is an utterance that we do together that basically says, don't worry, everything's fine. And what's interesting about that is if you look at the structure of jokes, okay, jokes are often based on tension. So a joke, or they're told in tense situations, which is what you were just talking about. So a joke is actually a way that sort of, if you want, kind of introduces a predator, okay, to the situation. It raises anxiety levels. Laughter is the release of that pressure. Like I said, it's an all clear call. So many social animals, if there is a threat, for example, ducks, I raise ducks, okay? And so if something flies overhead the ducks, and they think it might be a predator, okay, there's a particular noise they make and they all get down close to the ground. But when the predator goes by, okay, then they all make this other noise, which tells the group everything's okay. So if you think about that in the context which you were introducing about COVID, where we are turning to humor in a circumstance where we are all under a lot of stress, especially in the United States, and especially where you live, so that we can induce this all clear call, which we all agree socially means that everything's okay. All right, at least temporarily. So the use of humor and where humor pops up in human circumstance is extremely interesting. And I'm not in the least bit surprised that it is something that is now showing up because of the stress and strain that we're under. And by the way, just as an aside, one of the things that we have been involved with studying and understanding and in Wyville for many years is what's now referred to as social emotional health. And so we actually have a number of projects we've run over years using this virtual world to actually better understand these sorts of things between children. And that's a whole additional interest or area that's interesting. And an example of how you can use this technology to actually better understand how humans react. A piece of what will happen with this project I mentioned earlier, in which we're actually going to be doing pandemic, we're going to be extending our pandemic work within Wyville, will be actually watching how kids react to, not in the real world, but in the virtual world, getting a disease like COVID. And given that they're all immersed in this in the real world, okay, it will be very interesting to look at the difference between how they react in the real world, how they react in this virtual space, and what they learn as a consequence. So that's a little long-winded. Sorry, as I said, I am a professor, so I do tend to lecture, unfortunately. But humor is very interesting from a neurobiological point of view.
To chime in on that. So example, I just kind of remember while you were talking, it's a virtual Mimi now with kind of spreading. It was called Last Supper via Zoom. That's featuring like Jesus conducting the Last Supper via Zoom, and then say calling out like, Judas, you on. So yeah, so it's hard. Yeah, it's also recognized that hard to find a target for a good target for business. I think personal is easier. You will see lots of joke about eating disorder, overweight, or marital bickering and stuff. But for business, it was to be amusing joke without offending someone. That's a challenging issue. So currently, most of the joke we discovered were about COVID itself, about the virus and just a humor. One of that was about the brand Charming. There was Mimi says who is behind the COVID, and then unveil the whale, rip off the whale, and then discover a stack of Charming toilet paper, etc. So it's definitely taking some for brand, definitely taking some strategic, like longer term. It's not improvisational, but playing on it. Another example, it's not related with the COVID, but with how some brand have been able to implement this. It's the Oreo cookies. I think there was one of the year when during the Super Bowl, there was like half hour of electronic outage. And so the Oreo had a Super Bowl ad with there were very good cookie and cream ad, but then all of a sudden everyone were not able to watch Super Bowl like power outage. So they all the team were working on the fly, like shooting from the hip. They come up really slim version, like online social media meme. It says you can still dunk in the dark, and that was like a humor that really was quickly approved, and it was spread like crazy during the half hour. So the important, so like improvisational have to be timely for the marketing world.
Thank you,
Isn't
Linda. And Bert, yes, you would like to comment?
Yeah, it's, the thing is that, of course, being positive is the basics of everything. You know, you can't have a positive outcome with negative thoughts and attitudes. So everything is depending on ourselves. And what I wanted to discuss a bit is that that's we're seeing that more and more startups and companies are coming on the market, and there are many great ideas that people want to come up with, and let people and customers know about it. And the marketing is extremely important side of everything. So I think that from this point of towards, it's really important for companies to express themselves like in an outstanding way, you know, to do something differently, and try to find ways how to differentiate from everybody else, because I have seen like many times in different companies that some companies find a great way to communicate what they're doing, and how they can reach to people. And at the same time, some companies have tried to do it, but they haven't reached the results. So it's really important how the communication is working and how the market is being done. So for instance, one of the best examples I can make is Estonian startup unicorn company called TransferWise. They are like Estonian and UK common company, and few years ago they made like really disruptive marketing campaigns towards like the regular banks, and they reached a very good position on the market, and their campaigns were extremely good. So if somebody hasn't heard about this company or the marketing campaigns, I suggest you to Google and see from YouTube. The campaigns were really good.
Jim, you also wanted to comment?
Sure, how you tell your story is important. But one of the things we've been playing with for a number of years, and actually we may now have received a new level of investment to actually pursue this, is that, you know, one of the things that this technology can be used to do, instead of telling stories, is actually have people interact with the thing that you're talking about. So what I mean by that is that we call it simulation-based marketing or simulation-based engagement. So instead of just listening to a PowerPoint presentation, you actually get to interact with the thing, the product, the idea that the company wants to produce. So it's much easier to make a simulation of something than it is to actually make the thing itself. And in your case, for example, with respect to talking about currency structures, you know, we introduced one of the first virtual currencies ever in Wyville, 21 years ago. And it's been really interesting to watch how that economy has evolved within this virtual site for kids. You know, we've had no inflation. We have billionaires now. There's a lot of parallels with the real world. But, you know, in this virtual space, you can actually understand the economy and play with it in ways that you can't do in the real world. So I think and we are now in the process, for example, for a large private equity group to design a way that people that are interested in potentially investing in a new product can actually interact with that product in a virtual space rather than just rely on a PowerPoint presentation. And this involves using simulation technology. And I actually think this is an example, excuse me, of how this technology can be used to really transform how investment is done. So if you actually build, and this is starting to happen, but still a huge amount of investment depends on sort of PowerPoint presentations and telling a story. But if you can use CAD/CAM to actually build your product and have an investor understand how it works in a virtual space, in a simulation space, you know, that is, I think, a much more salient and in many ways, you know, a much more sort of hands-on way to evaluate investment opportunities. So we now, I think very shortly, like the beginning of next week, will be specifically, by the way, this is an example of you build a capacity in a virtual world for kids, where kids can actually play with complex things, whether physics or power plants or whatever. And you build that technology so that people can actually understand complex things using this virtual world for children. And then you take it and apply it to other places. So we are going to be applying the technology that we built in Wyville that allows people to understand complex things, specifically in the space of private equity and investment. So that a new way, other than PowerPoint presentations, and other than telling stories, actually, for people to get an understanding. And I would think for what you're talking about as well, Brad, that, you know, having an actual simulation or a model that investors could look at to understand the consequences and the potential. I mean, the hockey stick graph, I actually played professional ice hockey, so I understand hockey sticks pretty well. Okay. By the way, Estonia generates very good hockey players. I know that. You look like you might have played hockey, actually. But anyway, we don't want to go there. The point is that everyone can generate a PowerPoint hockey stick. But, you know, what you really want for an investor, especially in early stage companies, is for the investors to be able to kind of more deeply understand what you're doing. And this technology, simulation-based learning, is a way, we know, having studied it for 35 years, is a way for people to get a much deeper intuition and understanding about what's happening, and in this case, about something they might want to invest in. So that will, and I've never mentioned this before, okay, in this forum, but that is an example of how this technology will, I think, eventually transform the investment world. And like I said, we're in the process of starting to build a platform for that.
So Bert, you can maybe use it for your own company's promotion across the investments and use it for pitching, as Jim mentioned, maybe your investor relations. How is your fundraising going, by the way? Maybe you could share something of the progress you have and something of your milestones you're planning.
Definitely, we are open to any possible cooperations, and we are like really open-minded and try to implement and use as many new things as possible. Regarding our fundraising, actually, we have already made 3 successful capital raising fund rounds. And at the moment, we are looking for 4th investor. So to finalize the development of the new product solution. We have already started with the development, but we need to finalize it within upcoming months. So it has been quite a great journey because we started with the 4th round exactly before the COVID pandemic started. So at the first days, we were discussing that what will happen now if this economic situation will favor us or not, because for most companies, I think the COVID pandemic wasn't good, but actually for us it's good, so to say, because for instance, our company's turnover has doubled within the first half of the year compared to last year's full year. So because gold is all the time a good product, let's say, for in difficult times, and for us, all this economical situation is rather good, I would say. And we have had like different and very interesting negotiations and discussions with various potential investors, and I'm really happy for this opportunity to meet the new different people, and also I think this current situation in economy will give people like a good boost to be more creative and to come up with new ideas and to be more flexible and to see how we can how we can implement new things. And I think that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and we should use this situation to move forward. And I strongly believe that there are many good chances on the market at the moment, and just keep on working, and you need to believe in what you're doing. So that's the main thing.
Jim, any comment on that?
Sure, I agree. Again, I also teach a course in Origin of Life, starting with the Big Bang and coming all the way up to the current time. So talking about how evolution really works and how different species adapt or do not adapt to challenges. I think, and I mentioned this before with respect to the ed tech world, one really interesting thing about this current situation is it's not fooling around. So you can have billions of dollars of investment in ed tech when it kind of doesn't matter, but all of a sudden when it matters, the rules change. So there's great opportunity at the moment, no question, because we need innovation. But it's also the case that, the standards, there's less room for goofing around. And I think that's very positive. So again, in the ed tech world, you know, you can invest a lot of money in something, but if teachers can't use it, and if kids don't learn with it, and for example, if it can't be used on a very simple laptop or mobile device over a low bandwidth connection, okay, if it depends upon having a very sophisticated computer with high bandwidth, it's not going to work. It's not going to be relevant. It's not going to have its place in the market. So the current opportunity is two things. We need innovation. Okay, you can see already that people are rising to that opportunity, but it also can't be, it has to work. So if you take the vaccine situation, for example, or you take another example is the testing situation. You know, we've had tests for years for these things, and it kind of, if they didn't really work well, who cares? You can still sell them. Now it turns out false positive and false negatives matter a lot. So now the quality of the tests have to go up. It's a similar thing for the vaccine that eventually is going to be developed. You know, the vaccines in the United States that have been handed out for flus for years have only been, some of them have been as low as 25% effective. Okay, and everyone got them even though they're only 25% effective, because really you get the flu, so what? Now, the epidemiological models that get us out of this mess are all dependent about having a vaccine that's 80% effective. Huge opportunity for biotech companies, and many of them are in the business to make this vaccine because they will immediately sell billions of, you know, product. But it's got to be 80% effective. Okay, so great opportunity. And this, I think, goes across many industries. Great opportunity, but you can't goof around. You actually have to have a real product that really works because of the circumstances we're in. And that combination of two things, we need the innovation, but it needs to be real innovation, not nonsense, means that this, you know, situation has the potential to really move what our species is doing technically forward dramatically. You know, the analogy maybe is NASA in the early days. Okay, NASA set about to do something very hard with very old technology, put someone on the moon. And they found out very soon you can't goof around. If you're making something that's going to be part of the moon landing, it has to work. You can't goof around, okay? And I knew a lot of the people that worked on that project, okay? Because I was at Caltech, and there's a connection to JPL and NASA, and I've worked with NASA on the educational side for a number of years. And the people that joined NASA in those days are like the people that are now working for SpaceX. Okay, working for this private company, young, ambitious, smart, and they know they actually have to do it. You can't just goof around. NASA's been goofing around for years because things got much easier. So I agree with you, huge opportunity, huge need, but the really important thing is that there are going to be standards. You can't just make money by selling a product that doesn't work, I believe. And if those things are true, if there's a high bar for the actual value of the thing that's being produced and a high need, and therefore you combine those two things together, a high potential for ROI, as well as helping the world with a very difficult situation, then that's a perfect storm for really advancing what we do as a species, technically and otherwise. So I think we're in the severity of the situation is a tremendous asset for us in actually producing new things or reintroducing old things that are going to make a difference.
Thank you, Jim. And Bert, could you also comment before we close the event? What would be your summary about today's discussion, and what would you take as a takeaway?
I just wanted to say that I agree with Jim that the market will saturate, and there will be less room for new companies. So the innovation and how the product or service really works is extremely important. And I think that one of the most important keywords is transparency. I see that more and more technology companies who come on the market, they are offering a product or service that isn't as transparent as it should be. So everyday people, or like most people, if they don't understand it, the product or service will not be successful. So I see a huge opportunity to build new solutions that are really transparent. And that's the thing which we are also doing. And I have heard from many investors that, hey, there are many companies out there who are offering tokenized goals, but I see that most of these companies are not as transparent as they should and could be. So that's why the innovation should go together with transparency, and I think that in that case we see a very big step forward.
So
I watched the drama play out in the United States between the efforts at transparency and science-based policy and the efforts to actually tell a story that isn't based on science. You will see this play out. And the fact that it's similar in industry at the moment, you know, it's when people get serious, they get serious. When they can't afford anything but to be serious, they get serious. So the technology we're playing with now, really as an as someone with a business, your job is, you're an educator. Your job is to educate the people you want to invest in your product to the point where they understand it and when they're willing to back it. So you're a professor. And this devices we're playing with here, digital devices, provide new tools for you to educate the people that you would like to back you. And that's very exciting.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bertken. And we have to close the event today. Thank you for your valuable inputs and discussion for this Friday. And wish you good luck for the rest of the week, and see you soon on our further online events, Startup Leader Club. And please join our different formats. So Bertken already participated in our roadshow and pitch competition. So we also have online keynotes, masterclasses, and Startup Leaders Club sessions.